had a look at the VPC, we had to look at the different subnets, the CIDR ranges. Now, Amazon EC2 it's one of the most popular AWS offerings. So EC2 was probably one of the first offerings when AWS started up in, I think, 2012. Uh, and that's how it became popular, because at that point of time, all the companies were procuring their own Linux boxes, their own Windows boxes. It used to take a lot of time. So even I was working in one of the large banks at that time, and it took us around 2 years to procure a production grade server. So from the time we requested, so it really used to take a long time to procure the servers. Now, EC2 is Elastic Compute Cloud. It falls under the infrastructure as a service. So it will help you in getting up all the different sort of boxes, like Linux boxes, Windows boxes. Uh, it still doesn't cover up mainframe, which is unlikely that it will ever be covered. But it mostly relies on procuring the different flavors of Linux and Windows. So EC2, it consists of the capability of getting the virtual machines. You can have storage data on different virtual devices. So imagine these virtual drives as your USB stick on your laptop, so an external drive. So EC2 also has capability of distributing workloads across the different machines, so which is the elastic load balancers, and also it scales the service using an auto scaling group. So for those who do not understand the difference between load balancers and auto scaling, a load balancer is something where you have applications set up onto different machines, and if one machine goes down, the load balancer will automatically serve traffic to another machine. Whereas an auto scaling group would allow the machine to replicate itself in whenever there is a change in traffic. So let's say if your machine is serving 100,000 customers, there is a spike in traffic, you can have a separate deployment in another machine, and the auto scaling would actually help scaling up your multiple machines even at the runtime. So you can scale up your EC2 instances depending on the auto scaling group configurations that you have set up. I think we'll be looking at it more in detail on the ELBs and the auto scaling groups. So EC2 is fundamental. It's one of the very, very basic, and it's a must know. All right. So what does an EC2 consist of? So if you look in this diagram, so we've already had a look at, you've got your AWS here. It's divided into different regions. So within a region, you will have the different availability zones. Within the availability zones, you will have the boundaries of your VPC, your public subnets, the private subnets, your security groups. So within your security groups, you will create an instance. So this is where the instance lies. Now it can be either a public security group or a public subnet or a private subnet. But within those, you will be defining the security group, and the instance will be defined here. If you have an elastic block storage, there is a separate service called Amazon EBS, which will connect and provide an external drive to your Linux box.
How do you define an instance, or what exactly would that be?
An instance it's an EC2 machine. So we'll have a look in the demo as to what do you mean by an instance. But an instance by itself is when you create a Linux box, and yes, that becomes an instance. So it's assigned a specific IP address. You can determine that particular instance by its specific name that's been given to you by AWS. So an instance is just one instance is just one Linux box. So just looking at all these different item descriptions, so I think it's important to understand what do they mean. We'll be learning about all of them when we are creating it in a demo. But understand that instance is a virtual server, so it can be a Linux box or a Windows box. Amazon machine images. So these are the pre-configured templates that you can use to create your instance. So you can have an AMI where you can have either a plain Linux box, or you can have multiple different components which are already stored in. So, for example, let's say you create an instance where you have put in your Apache server, you put in Nginx, a lot of different applications. When you save that machine, you save it in terms of your AMIs. So it's more like an image of your whole Linux box. And you can start creating multiple Linux boxes using the same AMI, which will be a copy of each other. Then there's something called as instance types. So instance types are various configurations of your memory, storage, what the networking capacity is, what's the graphics, what sort of CPU should it have. So the different quality of instances. So you can have graphics oriented. I think there is another slide that we'll talk about on the instance types. But depending on what your requirement is, you can procure T2 instance, T3 instance, M1 instance, and each one have got very separate capabilities. Some of them are more memory optimized, some of them are more CPU optimized, some of them have very high level graphic hardware. So depending on your requirement, you choose which instance. Key pair, whenever you are creating an instance, there's something called as key pair. A key pair is, if you remember the last time we talked about the public and private keys in the Linux session. So key pair is very similar to your public and private key, where you create a private key and you store the public key on the box itself. And then you use your private key to log in onto the Linux box. If you have lost your key, you would not be able to log in onto your Linux boxes. Instance store volumes. So these are the volumes for temporary data. So this data is deleted when you stop, hibernate, or terminate your instance. So these are all temporary data volumes. You got Amazon EBS volumes, so which is a persistent storage. So this is the box. So persistent storage mean that even if you let's say stop your instance, they would still be there. The data will still be there. So when you restart your instance, the data will come back. So we spoke about the regions availability zones. There's something called as the AWS outposts and wavelengths. It's very similar to your endpoints. Security group. Security group. It's very, very important to understand what a security group is. It's a virtual firewall that allows you to specify the protocols, ports, and the IP ranges that can reach your instance. So we had to look at the CIDR ranges. So all the different ports which you want your application to access, the different types of protocols. You've got TCP/IP, you've got UDP, you've got HTTP, HTTPS, SSH. You have to define each and every protocol that you want, and each and every port that you want your application to be accessed. Security group defines the primary boundary of your AWS security. So if you have misconfigured your security group, it's very, very likely that your application will be hacked. So you have to be very, very sure to understand what security group means. How do you define the protocols, ports, and source IP ranges? We'll be looking at it in the demo very closely. But you need to really, really understand what security groups are. Elastic IP addresses. These are static IPv4 addresses for dynamic cloud computing. So that would mean that if you normally what happens is when you start up an instance or a cloud computing machine, a Linux box, it's assigned an IP address automatically. When you shut down the instance and you restart it again, your IP addresses of that machine changes. So, and it's every time. So every time you are starting up your machine, your IP address will change. If you want your IP address for some reason to be constant, that is when you use elastic IP addresses. I think in a VPC it allows only up to 5 elastic IP addresses, and it's not very it's not cheap. So it comes with an extra cost if you want to use elastic IP addresses. Normally, you would not see much usage of it in large organizations because they use all the other different stuff like load balancers, and also they don't use static IP addresses. Tags, these are the metadata that you can create and assign. You can have different names attached to your instance. And VPCs, we had a look at what virtual networks that you can create. Now, EC2 sizing and configuration options. So it's very, very important to keep in mind which machine are you trying to procure. So what operating system do you want? How much power and cores? How much should the RAM be? How much do you want to attach the storage to it? The speed of your ENIs, network cards, firewall rules, Bootstrap script. Bootstrap is something that whenever your EC2 is launching, let's say you want to do your yum updates before when the server is launching itself. So you can have some user data scripts at the start, and then it will be executed as soon as the instance instantiates automatically. Let's say you want to run a couple of let's say you want to install Apache server and you want it to be readily available even before you start logging in. So you can create that sort of scripting on the EC2. Now, all your sizing and configuration, they contribute towards your billing cost. So you have to be very, very careful. The billing cost can increase significantly if you are choosing much larger instances than you need. So always start up with the most little instance that you can, and then you scale up later on if you want. So you create an AMI, which is your machine image, and then you can use that machine image to start up another bigger instance. So EC2 user data, it's possible to bootstrap the instances using the user data script. So whenever your machine is starting up, if you want to install the updates, install a different software, so anything that you can run as in a shell script format, you can run it as a bootstrap. So it'll execute while it's instantiating the operating system. All right. So now these are the different instance types. So you would get in the menu option, it'll ask you what is the different types of instance that you want. So do you want a general purpose instance, or do you want an instance which is compute optimized? That means it's very, very CPU intensive. If you want something like a 16 core processor, it will facilitate it for you. It will give it to you. Of course, the pricing would be very, very expensive. If you want something which is memory optimized, higher RAMs, extreme RAMs, for example, if you are launching up a gaming application and you want a high memory gaming, that is where you use memory optimized. Similarly, storage optimized, high disk throughput. If you have even in terms of like say gaming or data warehousing or NoSQL DBs, so there you need to have a highly storage optimized servers, accelerated computing, hardware acceleration, video intensive video. So depending on what sort of application you are creating, AWS makes you available those different types of servers. But of course, there's a heavy cost attached with it. So the cheapest one are the general purpose servers, so which is your T2, T2 or even T3 nowadays. So if you are just using it for your own personal stuff, always use a T2 server. T2 Micro is free for 1 month. That's 750 hours per month. So that contributes to like every day for a month. I think T2 micro is generally it's sufficient if you just want to have an exposure to the Linux box and just want to see a Linux box.
Sir, T2 Micro is free for 1 year. Per month, 750 hours.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, T2 micro is free for 1 year for the first year of your AWS account. Uh, yeah, and all right. So the naming convention of an instance type. So it's like M5.2x large or M5.large or uh, T2.medium, T2.large. So what it means is where M classifies the instance class. So if you wanted a memory optimized, compute optimized will have a different one. A general purpose will have different naming conventions. 5 is defined as the generation. AWS keeps on increasing them as they improve. And 2x large in this instance is the size within the instance class. So how much bigger server that you're needing. So general purpose servers, they are great for the diversity of workloads. For example, your web servers or your code repositories. So it's a balance. It's a general purpose, as the name says. So it says the balance between the compute, memory, and networking. So we'll be using T2 Micro because not only that it's very cheap, it serves most of the general tasks that we want. So you can install a web server, you can install even let's say a little database in it like Postgres. So for all that material, it's good enough. So you can, if you have a WordPress site which is not really much used by in terms of traffic, you can keep it running in in a T2 Micro just for your own purpose. So that for that, I think it's uh, good enough. Compute optimized. I think we discussed high performance web server. So it all depends on what sort of server that you need. So you've got general purpose, you've got compute optimized, you've got memory optimized. So I think we discussed this storage optimized. Uh, EC2 type an example. So we've got T2 micro is 750 hours per month. It's free up till 1 year. Now, if you look at these instance, so T2 micro has got one CPU, it's got one memory, whereas T2 extra large will have 4 CPUs and 16 GB memory. So the different types of storage which is available. So in a C5D 4x large, you've got NVIDIA memory storage drive. So performance, network performance, if you want higher performance, you need to select larger servers, higher bandwidth. So you need to do a trade-off between the cost and what you need. So all between it's what you need is in terms of requirements.